Thank you, Acting Madam President. I rise on behalf of SA Best in support of this bill, which seeks to reinforce safety in rail transport through certification of qualifications and the competence of workers. One section of the Act will require the rail transport operators to prepare health and fitness programs. There are measures to grant exemptions to workers who may not meet all the criteria in the event of emergencies such as the pandemic. The fitness of rail workers to fulfil their responsibilities is vital in this heavy transport sector, and as South Australia is the lead legislator, this will flow through to national level. Acting Madam President, it's fascinating and it strikes me as being quite curious that of all the Australian states and territories, South Australia is a lead legislator when it comes to national rail laws. I say this because of all the states and territories, our existing rail networks are nowhere near the size or capacity of what occurs elsewhere. Now, this bill is all about rail safety, and that's a good thing, and we all support that. But what about the safety, the health and safety of our entire rail lines throughout the state? Around the country, we are seeing large nation-building rail projects. We're seeing them in resource-rich areas of Western Australia and Queensland. The Victorian government spending billions building up its freight and passenger networks. New South Wales continues to expand its rail services. Yet, South Australia remains the archaic rail oddity, not only in this country, but the world. We do not have any major infrastructure rail works in the pipeline, save for a planned 240-kilometre link between Lee Creek and Port Augusta by a mining company. I understand it's still waiting approval. It is time that we had a serious look at the health and fitness of our entire rail network, in particular the disused lines. And our regional rail lines have been allowed to fall into disrepair because successive state governments failed to ensure proper maintenance, compliance that rail companies were responsible for in the terms of their contract. That contract was quite clear on what the obligations were, or so we thought. Those lines had to be maintained to a standard that would allow them to be used and brought back into service at short notice. But as it now turns out, nobody in the Department of Transport or any of the ministers responsible ever cared to enforce it. Therefore, many regional lines were simply allowed to rust away with trees growing between rotting sleepers. One of the dumbest decisions made by this state was to turn its back on the existing network in the late 1960s and 70s in favour of road transport. A follow-on from Tom Playford's misguided decision to rip up our network of tram lines so that he could put more diesel-powered buses on our roads after inking a deal with Mobil for an oil refinery at Port Stanvac. Abandoning country rail proved to be the death knell of several once thriving regional centres. When rail disappeared, so did people living in regional communities linked by rail lines. Towns like Burra and Peterborough to the north and towns in our southeast slowly died. Populations dwindled. Regional communities were further isolated from the city, relying on infrequent bus services, cars or expensive flights, putting enormous pressure on our poorly managed and maintained regional roads, creating unsafe driving conditions which no doubt led to fatalities and injuries. Madam Acting President, representatives of the Burra community recently spoke out about the disruptive effect losing their rail links, causing an exodus of residents and making the community feel isolated. Viterra is now talking about rejuvenating the grain line on Eyre Peninsula it foolishly abandoned 3 years ago, claiming the deteriorating state of the track had slowed down freight trains, so it opted for putting more heavy vehicles on our crumbling regional roads to transport its grain to ports. Viterra's about-face has been influenced now by increased transport costs borne through high fuel prices, which will not be coming down in a hurry. Last year, I put it to the Chief Executive of the Department of Infrastructure and Transport, Mr Whelan, that his department had a real aversion to reinvigorating regional rail networks and seemed only interested in what was going on in the city. He told me he loved rail, that it was in his DNA with his dad working for the Australian National Railways, and that he believed rail was the backbone of Australia and would always be that way. Well, except in South Australia, of course. He then mentioned the electrification of the Gawler rail line where, as we know, costs blew out to exorbitant amounts. It is a line that services the needs of those who travel to and from the city. When I put it to him that they are doing nothing in the regions, he said Horizon, the company which took over lines previously run, and those run into the ground by One Rail, near Genesee, Wyoming, have come to the department with some ideas of utilising rail in the north. Well, that's nice, but why isn't DIT pursuing initiatives of their own? Mr Whelan's predecessor, Mr Braxton Smith, under direction of his then Minister and member for the Barossa seat of Schubert, Stefan Knoll, made the incredibly stupid decision to slice the line between Tanunda and Nurayupta to make way for a hideous vehicle roundabout. The move cruelled an ambitious yet attractive tourism initiative by Shadow Tanunda's colourful character of an owner, John Geber, to bring back a wine train, much like the successful operation in California's Napa Valley. Ideas like this need nurturing and encouragement rather than be dismissed out of hand by bureaucrats and politicians lacking any vision. I still hope it can happen. Who knows, we might yet see Sam Smith or someone of that ilk tooting the whistle on a train loaded with influencers travelling through one of the most picturesque and famous regions in this country. In response to a question from me to Mr Whelan about why those country lines were allowed to fall in disrepair in the first place, the contract signed in 1997 excluded maintaining all rail lines that had been disused before 1997, ruling out a lot of those regional lines that had been used for both freight and passengers. The contract also included a puzzling dormant condition, a minimum service requirement that was meant to maintain the infrastructure only to a level which was reasonably practicable to reopen the line for rail traffic of a similar volume and nature as was operated on the line before it was closed to rail traffic within a period of 2 weeks. That was the term in the contract. Well, you could drive a locomotive through that condition, Madam Acting President. Those volumes would have been quite negligible by then anyway, so next to nothing. But worse still, this dormant condition obligation only applied to actively used Australian National Railways Commission lines in the year prior to the commencement of the lease in 1997, and it only applied for the first 5 years of the lease, which expired in November 2002. So we've seen 21 years of total neglect. Mr Whelan went on to say that since November 2002, it has not been practical, reasonable or commercial for the lessee to maintain unused tracks in a state that is able to be returned to active service. Seriously, what an abject failure of government to protect the sovereign interests of the state and its taxpayers on ill-founded and misguided socio-political reasons. Eminent King's Counsel, former Eyre Peninsula country girl, Mari Shaw KC, revealed that a DIT whistleblower told her it was unspoken policy in the department for a long time that road transport was always the preferred option over rail. Mr Whelan has denied this, but from my own knowledge and experience dealing with this issue, I'm siding with Ms Shaw until I see otherwise. However, it was pleasing to see that the government, this government, has put $9 million towards the maintenance of bridges and other infrastructure used for the very popular Steam Ranger and Pitchy Ritchie railway journeys run by volunteer enthusiasts. And that brings me to the proposal by Spanish company Talgo to run the trial of their unique fast train using its innovative variable gauge technology between the Keswick terminal and to Mount Barker that would demonstrate what can be achieved on the existing standard gauge line running through the hills. Right now, we know that there are transport challenges in the hills because of the ever-expanding development in Mount Barker and surrounding towns. Now, we only saw the other day the Mayor of Mount Barker, Madam Acting President, predict that the population of that town could hit 40,000, making it the second largest city in the state. Having such a service, a rail service from Mount Barker into the city, would ease the traffic congestion to and from the city, provide a valuable, uninterrupted and rapid service, and would also serve to reduce the spate of traffic choking incidents on the South Eastern Freeway. Mr President and Madam Acting President, it's disappointing that a briefing paper recently put out by the Minister and his department canvassing options for the South Eastern Freeway did not even touch about the rail trial, even though Mr Whelan assured us that the government was keen for it to proceed, pending some financial commitments from the Spanish government. These discussions are going at such a snail's pace and through no fault of the Spaniards that it could be 2 to 3 years before we even sight any movement there, let alone the train Talgo wants to ship out here. Now, Talgo believe that they have the rapid speed technology to provide a quick and efficient service that is not available in Australia. In October, I travelled to Las Matas, Madrid, and met with Talgo's CCO, Mr Rafael Sterling, Mr Jesus Rodriguez, the Head of Business Development for the Asia-Pacific region, and Mrs Elena Garcia, the Project Manager for the Asia-Pacific region, where we discussed their enthusiasm to undertake the trial and the possibility of Talgo establishing a manufacturing base in South Australia, as they did in Kazakhstan, where more than 2,000 jobs were created in the manufacture of Talgo's rolling stock. Talgo has operations around the world. However, it is quite enthusiastic about establishing a presence in the Asian region, and preferably in Australia, where its unique variable gauge and carriage tilting systems and their hybrid and hydrogen-powered fast trains would transform rail freight and passenger services. I went there under my own steam because it was important as a member of the Honourable Robert Sims's Transport Committee and as a supporter of rail to experience Talgo's truly revolutionary and innovative technologies which have already transformed rail travel not only in Spain but throughout Europe. 1970 Spain was not unlike South Australia, where car travel overtook existing public transport services, causing a steady decline in passenger numbers. However, a side effect was that the motor vehicle traffic flows increased dramatically, creating a whole new set of problems in large cities like Madrid. In the late 1980s, Talgo modernised rail services and reversed declining patronage with comfortable, high-speed trains able to operate at more than 200 kilometres an hour and fitted with an automatic variable gauge system. Like Australia and this state, there are different sized gauges in Spain. Talgo's train sets can switch from, say, 1668 millimetres or 1435 millimetres sized line without having to stop. Talgo trains running at maximum speeds of 330 kilometres an hour have been in commercial service in Spain since 2005. They're trains with a variable gauge system and a top speed of 250 kilometres an hour have been running on several routes since 2007. Spain, like Australia, is also experiencing the post-COVID after effects of housing affordability and cost of living pressures, with many families now moving to more affordable regional cities and towns. Their fast train network enables people to mix between working from home and travelling into larger cities like Madrid, Seville or Barcelona. Patronage has increased significantly. Talgo and the Spanish government's train operator, Renfe, invited me in the driver's cabin for their Madrid to Zamora service, some 254 kilometres, or the distance roughly between Adelaide and Port Augusta, which is around 308 kilometres. The train set was a hybrid, meaning it runs on both diesel and electricity. The variable gauge system was also used on the journey. I would not have known when the train changed gauges had it not been pointed out to me by the driver. It was an incredibly smooth and quick journey, effortlessly reaching a top speed of 250 kilometres an hour. It took just on an hour, even with some stops along the way. To put that in some local context, you could safely travel from Adelaide to Port Augusta in just over an hour, compared with the 3.5 hours or more by road. At Talgo's manufacturing factory, I saw how the unique variable gauge system works and their sophisticated guided axle tilting technology system, which accommodates the high-speed capacity of Talgo's train sets. I also inspected a new train rolling off the production line with a luxurious and comfortable interior. This train is destined for the Madrid to Paris journey, some 1,276 kilometres. With a top speed of 330 kilometres an hour, the trip would take just 3 hours. Given current fuel prices and infrequent, slower public bus services throughout our regional centres, linked by existing rail, used or unused lines, I'm confident people would jump at it and it would breathe new life into those regional communities forgotten by years of city-centric transport politics. The Walker Corporation is currently developing a massive residential and commercial estate, Riverlea, on the Port Wakefield Road at Buckland Park. The $3 billion development will eventually be home to 30,000 residents, another satellite city that will present transport challenges on Port Wakefield Road. Residents would benefit from the creation of a rail spur line and a fast train that would carry passengers into the city. Talgo is confident it can complete the trip from Mount Barker to Adelaide in under an hour. The company would also look at trialling on the overland route between Adelaide and Melbourne, which it says would slash the travel time from 10.5 hours to around 6 hours. I mean, who needs to jump on a plane, Mr. President, when you can do that trip and go through various towns in that region and then get to Melbourne? It'd almost be the same time as it would be to prepare a train journey. So if we were to adapt Talgo's technology, I'm confident we would see a momentous switch to rail travel. I've written to the Minister for Transport, the Honourable Tom Koutsantonis, to fast-track negotiations with Talgo and work with the company and the Spanish government to overcome any existing obstacles. I would also urge the Premier and Trade and Investment Minister, the Honourable Nick Champion, to make the trial an urgent priority. There are joint economic efforts and enormous job creation opportunities awaiting us. I would hate to see them lost to another state which appreciates the value of rail more than we have. I commend the bill to the chamber. Thank you.
The Honourable Mr. No.
Thank you.